Welcome back to our study in Matthew. Pastor Zach did a great job yesterday in chapter 5. And when you look at chapter 5, 6, and 7, you see where Jesus is teaching his disciples how to live, what kind of attitude to have. Since you've become a believer in Jesus or a follower of Christ, we need to know how to live. And so I think it's important. And today I want to teach you from chapter 6 and chapter 7 what Jesus taught about prayer. So in chapter 6, Jesus starts teaching the disciples how to pray. And I find it funny, but Jesus teaches them first how not to pray. He says you don't need to be like the hypocrites standing on the corners trying to draw attention to yourself when you pray. He says you need to go into your private place. And for you, you need to have a private place to pray. I think it's important for all of us to have a place where we can be private and pray to our Father. And so he says you need to pray to your Father, tell him what you need, and your Father who sees everything, and by the way, he already knows what you need, will answer your prayers. And then he says this, he says you don't need to keep babbling on and on and on and on, thinking that that's going to get your prayers answered. He says, guys, I want to give you some structure how to pray. And so what we get in chapter 6 is we get a model or a template on how to pray. And I think it's important to know how to pray, and it's important to have a structure or even a template on prayer. And I remember as a kid thinking that this was how you're supposed to pray. This was an actual prayer, but I realize now it's not really an actual prayer. It's a template on how to pray. So when I pray and I bring my specific request to God, this is how I need to pray. So when you pray, when you study this chapter 6, and you start to pray, you need to pray with this template in mind and pray in this order. And so Jesus in chapter 6 teaches the disciples how to pray. And then you get into chapter 7 and he says, guys, listen, I want your prayers to be effective, so I'm going to teach you how to have effective prayers. Now, I think we all need to be effective in our prayers. And so it's one thing to know how to pray. It's another thing to know how to have effective prayer. So in chapter 7, and I want to read this to you, Jesus teaches his disciples these things. Verse 7, he says, keep on asking and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. And to everyone who knocks, the door will be open. Notice he said everyone. You're a part of that. In verse 9, he says, you parents, if your children ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Or if they ask for a fish, do you give them a snake? Of course not. So if you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? So Jesus is saying to his disciples in this chapter, guys, I want you to be effective in your prayers. And he says, this is how you become effective in your prayer. So let me give it to you real simple. How do I become effective in my prayers? This is how. You ask until it's given to you. You seek until it's found. And you knock until it's been opened. And know that you have confidence that God, who is a good Father, gives to his children good gifts. And so today, as you study chapter 6 and chapter 7, know that Jesus is teaching you how to live, and know that he's teaching you how to pray and be effective in your prayers. And apply this to your prayer life, and apply all these teachings to your life, and watch what God does. Thank you so much for being with us today.